Sometimes a message drifts into a life not as coincidence, but like a coded pattern only the keen can decode. These encounters rarely seek the busy intersection. They're more like secret corridors that only the attentive wander into. Consider for a moment the odd way some words seem to find a place, echoing something half-remembered, like a melody playing behind closed doors. There's a quiet promise moving beneath the surface, a reward lined up for those who have weathered storms in silence, carrying their own burdens without applause. It's not just a chance meeting on a digital street. Sometimes, what appears is there to remind that even ordinary days can split open, revealing a seam in the fabric of things. August, for some, may seem another line on a calendar, but for a handful, it marks the threshold of a different kind of rhythm. When the sense of being overlooked grows heavy, or the world feels a little too far away, these signals arrive, subtle but certain. The question hangs in the air: is this a sign, or simply the echo of a need to believe in more? Maybe, for some, that answer is already humming in the background, waiting for a nod of recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that today is not just another day. Pause and wonder, is this moment just passing through, or is it setting the stage for something quietly seismic beneath the routine? There's a quietly misunderstood reason for feeling out of step, a pattern that's often misread as an error in design rather than a necessary calibration. What feels like exile isn't always exile. It's more like a prism separating noise from signal, making the rare frequencies clearer. Not every bell rings for every listener. In the hush of late nights and the weight of unspoken words, there's a form of perception that moves just beneath the skin. It's not disorder but a kind of internal compass, pointing away from comfort and toward a sharper form of understanding. For some, the world's silence is not an absence, but a classroom. The difficulty isn't a penalty, but the shaping tool of a role not easily defined. Life's challenges carve pathways for seeing what others miss, revealing clarity where confusion once lived. This kind of journey isn't about belonging to the crowd, but about tuning in to what the static obscures. So, ask honestly, could solitude be less of a wall and more of a doorway, inviting something new to cross the threshold? August 1st doesn't arrive as a rescue boat for those adrift, nor as a parade for the passive. It moves more like a silent lift, calibrated for those with eyes trained to catch movement in stillness. What enters this passage isn't seeking applause or followers. It gravitates toward the few who've endured long nights and walked out the other side still listening for quiet signals in a world full of noise. That's why this stretch of time is so rare. It isn't marked by chaos but by the sudden absence of a familiar pressure. Sometimes, what's been weighing down the mind simply slips away, and only then does perception sharpen. Not because the world has gone mute, but because the source of distraction finally relents. In these moments, awareness blooms, not from silence itself, but from a rare opening where real messages can break through. Now, does that register as mere coincidence, or is it the setup for something waiting in the wings all along? What makes this date significant has nothing to do with theatrical spectacles or cosmic drama. There are no wild storms or planetary showdowns waiting in the wings. Instead, August 1st unfolds like a deep breath after holding tension, with the atmosphere settling enough for a subtler kind of movement. Normally, intuition has to elbow its way through a crowded room, thoughts clashing, worries stacking up, astrology adding its own chaos. But this time, for just a sliver of the day, the background noise thins out to almost nothing. There's no cosmic neon sign, just a rare window where the usual distractions pause, and access to inner clarity quietly expands. Some may wonder if this is the moment the mind finally sharpens, or if that old, persistent alertness is actually a signal tuning in to something long denied. When the usual clutter fades, it becomes easier for those who've grown used to listening below the surface to catch what was always there. Have you ever noticed how insight arrives, not in the loudest hour, but when the world lets itself be still for a change? Some days don't ask for big gestures, but for a kind of listening that's active, like catching faint colors on the edge of vision. The atmosphere on this day carries impressions, symbols, sudden ideas, fragments from old memories, and if they're overlooked, those sparks won't swing back for another try. That's the unique power of this window. It opens once, and the invitation is silent except to those who've spent seasons tuning their senses to the quieter layers of reality. The most vital signals tend to arrive not with a roar but a murmur, sliding in just as the world's usual background hum fades. And before this is chalked up as another trendy portal or energy moment, it's worth pausing. The degree of calmness here isn't just an empty room, it's a clue that something meaningful is drawing closer. It was never about missing the right hour. The process has always been about shielding a moment until it's strong enough to be seen. Now, what does it mean when the universe arranges a stretch of time this quiet? What is it quietly making room for? There's an idea that if arrival doesn't happen early, the ship has sailed. That myth is stubborn, but the truth is quieter and stronger. Presence in this exact moment isn't random or the result of some missed deadline. It's part of a rhythm that doesn't discard those who unfold slowly. In fact, the rarest forms of understanding are stashed away for those with hands steady enough to hold them. Delay isn't a detour, it's a kind of reinforcement. Notice how life, for some, never really played soft, because what lives inside isn't ordinary, and typical circumstances could never surface it. The timeline, the setbacks, even the struggles aren't a pile of leftovers, they're the scaffolding for something durable. Many jump out of the gate with fireworks, burning hot and fading quick. Others, however, are designed to step forward when the entire scene is about to flip. The job isn't to disappear into the crowd, but to set roots where the deepest currents shift. Has anyone ever told you that maybe, just maybe, being late was the most precise timing possible? There's a quiet truth that rarely gets spoken. Nothing in the universe is running late, and neither is the life winding its way to this very hour. Timing isn't a punishment for moving at a personal rhythm, it's the hidden guardrail keeping the journey from unraveling too soon. Guilt over so-called delay dissolves when realizing that the real milestone isn't a finish line or deadline, but the spark when presence finally meets readiness. August 1st doesn't flash by as a victory lap, but arrives as the first turn of the ignition. It doesn't wait for crowds or checklists, it opens for those still standing after storms, for those who didn't abandon the field when the weather shifted. Something tangible is now closing the distance, not another riddle or challenge, but a straightforward encounter that may blur the border between self and fate. Destiny isn't a pursuit to chase down, it's a force that circles patiently, waiting for the runner to finally stand still. Ever notice how the world rearranges itself the moment resistance softens? That's the unannounced arrival of what's been orbiting all along. Almost no one points out that while exhaustion and confusion set up camp in the mind, something greater is quietly tracking every step. The biggest dream, the old impossible, the vision long put aside as too bold for ordinary days. That vision doesn't demand attention or bang on doors, it simply hovers at the edges, always scanning for a moment when the mind and heart aren't leaking energy into old doubts. When the internal compass settles, when the noise fades, an alignment happens, not because the date is circled on a calendar, but because the field finally clears. For the first time in ages, visibility returns, and that future, once dismissed as fantasy, is suddenly within touching distance. Déjà vu and unexplainable anticipation aren't tricks of the mind. They're signals, warnings that a breakthrough is near. The dream doesn't kick down the door. It materializes quietly, almost daring the observer to recognize its outline through the haze of skepticism. When the air grows thick with the sense that something is about to shift, it's not the mind playing games, it's potential circling for a landing. Once it arrives, the question is simple. Will the heart answer the call to embody the kind of strength required to nurture it? Most only brush against a sliver of their real potential. The rest lies waiting, dormant beneath habits taught for survival. Perhaps the deeper question is, what would happen if, just once, the sleeper inside finally woke up and answered? Somewhere deep in the architecture of every life lies a hidden occupant, a version of self that predates logic, words, and learned behaviors. It isn't guided by explanation or rules, but instead pulses with an old, instinctual knowing, one that has quietly tracked the purpose of arrival long before it was forgotten by the everyday mind. For most, this quiet resident remains locked behind layers of noise, culture, and the practiced rituals of comfort and fear. It rarely surfaces. The surface world is simply too loud. Yet, on rare occasions, the boundaries between surface and depth grow thin. Subtle shifts occur, restlessness with no clear cause, the sense of something internal stretching and pushing for recognition, and the inability to articulate what's moving. Perhaps this sensation has been felt lately, an unplaceable energy, stirring somewhere beyond language, aligning with a calendar date that carries a whisper of significance. This inner presence is not summoned on a whim. It responds to a unique resonance in the environment. August 1st brings with it a rare atmosphere, a silence that's more than absence of sound, but a real invitation, a signal that the hidden self has long waited for. As the external world quiets, this internal force begins to rise, not with fireworks but with a steady urgency, testing whether the time is finally safe for emergence. Restlessness grows, and a question surfaces. Is this the start of remembering what was once written into the core of being, now hidden under the layers of routine and adaptation? The truth isn't about learning new information, but about excavating what was always there, sleeping beneath the trained habits of surviving and belonging. Somewhere inside, the agreements made long ago are intact, simply waiting for the right conditions to be activated. The sense of not being fully present isn't brokenness, it's a system waiting to reboot. Sometimes, all it takes is a moment, a day, or a rare shift in the air to spark the gradual process of reawakening. The mind may call it confusion, but at the deepest level, it's simply growth pressing through the old shell. Have things been feeling strangely off lately? Different, but not chaotic? Perhaps that's not trouble, but the gentle tremor of something ancient stirring back to life. There are moments when the reflection in the glass looks familiar, but the essence inside feels like it's hovering just outside the boundaries of a name or habit. It isn't fracture or disarray. It's the shedding of an old container that can no longer carry what's rising from within. The unsettling sense of not quite belonging anywhere isn't chaos but a gentle dimming of the former self, an intentional blur while new contours form in the background. The identity once crafted from worry, obedience, and inherited scripts now sits loose, ready to be outgrown. This isn't the triumphant upgrade that gets celebrated. It's more like forgetting the choreography to a dance that no longer suits the music. The need for space from others isn't bitterness, it's the gradual silence of roles outliving their usefulness. When passions pause and emotions run wild, it's less about losing touch and more about internal systems realigning, as if an old compass suddenly spins and the old routes vanish. A hollowness in old haunts, a craving for quiet or realness, signals that the story is shifting. Becoming the real self is a slow erasure of every part that was borrowed for survival. As those rare windows of resonance approach, like the thinning air of a new season, the old mask loosens. Feeling like a stranger is not a flaw, it means something deep is finally stepping into view, and the protective ego is learning to move aside. Meaning doesn't have to be forced. Sometimes clarity arrives only after the static fades, when the ancient knowing steps forward and the journey of true remembering begins to crystallize. It's worth wondering, what would happen if this unraveling was embraced, rather than explained away? Recognition of the deeper layers within often arrives quietly, a sense that life is larger than the body alone. Yet there's a difference between opening one's eyes and stepping into the landscape revealed. Many reach the edge, glimpse the hidden machinery behind the world's appearances, and feel the electric charge of seeing beyond old patterns or limiting roles. That first surge is dazzling, even daunting, but it isn't the destination, it's the threshold. Realization alone isn't the transformation, it's the invitation to anchor that awareness into daily reality. Some will collect visions, dream of new paths, and call it complete. But the next step, the one that's rarely taken, is embodiment, a return to the real, where ideals are lived out, not just imagined. That's what this phase brings, not the easy hope of a new wish list, but the hard-earned gravity of stepping fully into what calls, even when the cost is solitude or the reasons aren't yet clear. The journey isn't about soaring above the world in light, it's about rooting into a deeper mission, one that shakes the foundations. The difference between knowing and living is immense. Insight can open the door, but true change requires letting the old path burn behind, leaving no road back. For those still present and resonating, this isn't just an awakening. It's the early tremor of being called to a different kind of responsibility. Have you noticed how the invitation to act always arrives just as comfort tries to pull you back? Existence was never meant to be navigated with the brakes on, nor was resilience gifted just to keep a spirit safely contained. Survival through storms wasn't simply a test of endurance, it was preparation for an unseen role, to shift frequencies, unsettle boundaries, and ripple awakening just by living authentically. August 1st doesn't open its doorway for every traveler. It opens for those who have felt the undercurrent pulsing in moments of stillness, who recognize that restless energy as something deeper pushing from within. When that invisible threshold appears, what unfolds isn't just a milestone, it's a point of entry. Beyond that point, the essential work of living as the real self begins, and everything quietly remembers. The earth responds, the ordinary rearranges itself. Sometimes the leap forward isn't driven by boldness, but by a willingness to finally answer the voice that's whispered from the background for years. There's a kind of momentum that doesn't scare, but instead vibrates with the inevitability of destiny. It can't be silenced or reasoned away. It circles back, growing louder as these rare days approach. August 1st carries a unique energy, one that doesn't just allow for transformation, but magnifies it. In such a field, bravery isn't struggle, it's resonance. The old questions, the dreams gathering dust, even decisions that once seemed distant suddenly feel possible. Less like risks, more like calls home. Readiness feels less important than resolve. This isn't a license for reckless action, but an invitation to finally recognize and step through the entryway that's always been there. Think back. When was the last time an instinctual leap transformed the whole map? There are junctures where the usual boundaries grow thin, allowing the extraordinary to slip in. Some days act as hidden crossroads, allowing subtle but powerful shifts to unfold with little fanfare. These are the times when the mind drifts toward long-abandoned visions or is unexpectedly nudged by connections that echo forgotten ambitions. Sometimes, decisions that once triggered anxiety now spark an odd relief, as if some old inner stalemate has broken. The next move may not be fully illuminated, yet there comes a moment when the discomfort of remaining unchanged becomes heavier than the uncertainty of growth. August 1st stands as one of these rare intervals. Excuses often sound like wise counsel, disguising themselves as safety, but deep down, they're just the voice of hesitation. Every internal postponement, every declaration of not yet or wrong time, served its purpose, but perhaps it was never about the right moment arriving from outside. Perhaps it was always about a disruption in the script, a glitch in the cycle, a crack in the illusion of waiting. When such a day arrives, what once felt like security starts to feel restrictive. Comfort zones lose their appeal, and the stories spun to defend old limits begin to unravel, not from punishment, but because the version of self that required those boundaries is quietly dissolving. Isn't it strange how quickly the mind finds new reasons to wait, only to watch those reasons dissolve the moment a true invitation finally arrives? Beneath the current of these shifting days, a raw intensity gathers, one that isn't here to cater to careful planning or reward perfection. It moves with a purpose all its own, to clear away the debris of half-truths and stalled beginnings. Time, it turns out, is not the missing ingredient. What matters is peeling back the old reasons for postponement, those inherited scripts about worthiness and preparation. The energy swirling now doesn't ask for more readiness, it asks for less avoidance. On days like this, Transformation is less about the world changing and more about finally ceasing the quiet sabotage against a self that's long been ready. The identity that once fit so snugly starts to unravel, and the real friction isn't against anyone else, it's an internal reckoning. Subtle but insistent, this awareness doesn't let things continue as they were, not for another cycle. If cracks appear, let them be. Those fissures mark the beginning, not the end. There's no need to torch the old structure, just to see through the illusion that there was ever a real lock on the door. With that realization, the inner fire that once seemed menacing becomes a path to liberation. An unexpected quiet might arrive, an absence not of questions, but of the restless search for them. In that pause, a new clarity dawns. 4 years, perhaps a lifetime, the mind may have played a familiar tape. Caution, self-doubt, the endless second-guessing that kept bold steps just out of reach. It became background noise, so steady that it faded into the scenery. But in the present window, something unusual emerges. The old voice of hesitation softens, loses power, even disappears. The automatic reflex to undermine intuition finds nothing to press against, just silence, because the static is finally gone. What fills the space isn't emptiness, but a resonance of clear, undiluted selfhood, a pulse of authority and inner rhythm that may feel almost unremarkable for how quietly it arrives. The moment it becomes apparent, confusion gives way to the recognition that uncertainty was never a native voice. It was absorbed, trained, repeated, but never truly chosen. And what wasn't chosen can be set down. August 1st doesn't flip the script by demanding reinvention. It simply returns the scene to the original cast, the self before doubts were handed out by the world. From this point, trust ceases to be a lofty concept and becomes instinct, guiding each step like a compass set to true north. For those still present in this unfolding, gratitude is due, for witnessing, for sharing, and for participating in a community of genuine seekers. The invitation stands: reflect, share, connect, and if the journey resonates, stay close for what's next. And so the circle closes, for now. May the path ahead be met with curiosity and courage. Take care, and return for more explorations into wisdom and awakening. Transitions like these rarely come with grand announcements or celestial alignments that everyone can see. Instead, the most meaningful shifts often slip in quietly, disguised as restlessness or as an odd calm that settles without warning. It's easy to miss at first, easy to brush off as just another strange day. But when tuning into the subtle undercurrents, it becomes clear that something within has changed, as if the old blueprint has been edited in invisible ink. There's a phase after the first awakening where nothing seems to fit quite right, a liminal territory where old routines fall flat, and familiar joys lose their taste. In this in-between, the mind tries to fill the space with rationalizations, but the soul resists, craving depth over distraction. How often is discomfort just the mind's protest against leaving behind a story that was always too small? It's worth asking, when did comfort become a cage, and what happens the moment it's no longer needed for protection? It's a strange paradox that the closer one moves toward true freedom, the more vulnerable life feels. Without the armor of old fears, there's a sense of exposure, a rawness that can be mistaken for weakness. Yet, it's in that openness that the real self breathes for the first time, drawing in the world not as a threat but as a canvas. That's the power of these energetic turning points. They strip away the layers of expectation, leaving only the bones of what matters. Sometimes it feels like losing one's place in the world, but really, it's about finding a new foundation that was always hidden beneath the surface. As this new alignment takes hold, unexpected memories and old desires may bubble up, asking for recognition. Some may feel called to reconnect with dreams long left behind, while others find themselves pulled toward new experiences that once would have seemed out of character. This is not regression, it's the system rebalancing, seeking out forgotten colors to add to the present palette. The challenge lies in welcoming the unfamiliar without demanding that it explain itself right away. Growth doesn't always send a memo before it arrives. Sometimes it just shows up at the threshold and waits for an invitation to step inside. During times like these, relationships can feel the tremor. Those who resonated with the old version may struggle to recognize the emerging one. Connections that once felt effortless might now feel strained, not from lack of love, but from a shift in frequency. It's tempting to shrink back, to return to the familiar simply to avoid discomfort, but that's rarely the answer. Instead, this is a call to communicate from a place of honesty, to allow bonds to evolve or dissolve as needed, and to trust that whatever remains is in alignment with what's next. There's also a collective element at play. These thresholds aren't crossed in isolation. There's a rising sense of shared experience, a realization that many are being nudged awake at the same time. The world itself is in a period of deep recalibration. Collective systems, beliefs, and identities are in flux. What if the personal journey isn't separate from the wider transformation? What if each act of inner honesty ripples out, subtly shaping the collective direction? These questions linger, opening space for reflection. Maybe that's why the drive to isolate intensifies before a leap. The psyche needs solitude not to escape others, but to anchor a new signal before sharing it. As the internal landscape settles, clarity returns. The mind may not have all the answers, but the need for certainty fades, replaced by a quiet trust that each step is enough. It's a radical act, really, to walk forward without a map, guided only by an inner resonance that feels both ancient and brand new. Eventually, the edges of the unknown become familiar. What once felt like loss transforms into liberation. What once seemed like an ending reveals itself as the prelude to arrival. The permission to inhabit a new self is granted not by any external force, but by the willingness to release what was never truly owned. The invitation to return is always open, but the return is never to what was left behind. It's to a version of self that finally feels whole, integrated, and fully awake. And perhaps the greatest freedom lies in realizing there is nothing left to prove, only experiences to welcome, lessons to integrate, and connections to deepen. Every day becomes a portal, every encounter an opportunity to remember and embody the truth that has quietly waited for acknowledgement. The journey continues, not as a chase, but as a dance with the present moment, unburdened by yesterday's limits or tomorrow's anxieties. So as this moment of low interference draws near, let the shift happen. Let the stories fall away, the doubts dissolve, the heart steady itself in a new rhythm. Notice how the air feels different, how the silence hums with possibility. And if the urge to share, to connect, to step into the unknown arises, honor it. That's the language of the soul making itself heard. That's the real return, when being alive becomes an act of gentle, unstoppable rebellion. And as this video closes, carry that spark forward. Let it light the way, not just for a single day, but as a living reminder that transformation is never finished. It is always, beautifully, just beginning.